She started coming home later, carrying the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it changes its temperature, like the air turns colder even when the windows are shut and the city hums on outside as if nothing has happened at all. Dinner cooled lately, untouched, the steam thinning into a ghost of what warmth used to be between us, and I learned the language of quiet, the scrape of a chair, the click of a lock, the way a phone screen glowed face down like a firefly pretending to be dead. There's a rhythm to distance, a choreography of small absences, and once you notice it, you can't unhear it, like the drip from a leaky faucet at 2 a.m., counting out the seconds you can't get back. The first time I missed her laugh, it wasn't because she didn't laugh, it was because it didn't reach me, like a joke told in another room where you catch the outline but not the meaning. I told myself it was stress, then fatigue, then weather, the way rain can blame everything on the sky while soaking you all the same. Her coffee cup sat on the table with a perfect crescent of lipstick, a witness that never spoke, and I hated that I memorized the shape even as I washed it away each morning, like a ritual of denial that felt holy and foolish at once. The apartment dimmed by accident when I forgot to open the curtains, and gray light pooled on the floorboards like someone spilled the day and didn't bother to clean it up, and I stood in that puddle of light wondering when I became a shadow in my own life. Love doesn't end, someone turns it down slowly, and you convince yourself you're imagining it until the sound is barely there, a radio under static playing your favorite song while the station drifts out of range. She started locking her phone, then guarding it, then sleeping with it under her pillow, and I laughed too loudly, the night I called it a pacemaker for a heart that was always somewhere else. She didn't laugh back. She looked past me, not like I wasn't there, but like I was a memory she would put away later, carefully, to keep it from. The discovery wasn't cinematic. It was a receipt wrinkled and damp from a pocket, the ink bleeding like it had cried in the rain. 2 dinners, 1 room, a date that fell on a night I ate alone and told myself she needed space. I traced the restaurant name with my thumb and felt the way the letters pressed into the paper like they were pressing into my chest, leaving a reverse of themselves I couldn't wash away, and the smell of our kitchen, old coffee, chill air, last night's onions, suddenly felt like someone else's life I was just renting for the month. I didn't storm anywhere. I sat, and the chair held me like a friend who doesn't ask questions, and the fridge hummed its indifferent lullaby while rain began, soft at first, then necessary, pinning the whole city to the glass. Light flashed on my phone, her message. Running late, a sentence worn thin by use, a coin rubbed smooth until the face is gone and all that's left is weight. I typed "be safe" and backspaced it because safety was the wrong prayer. What I wanted was honesty, and the word wouldn't fit in my mouth without tasting like metal. When she came in, she smelled like rain and someone else's cologne that tried to hide inside her hair. It was polite, almost timid, like guilt that didn't want to make a scene, and I wondered if my own scent, coffee, paper, or soap, had become background noise to her. The bag went down, the keys slid, her eyes did that quick scan of the room like she was checking if the lie had moved anything while she was gone, and I knew then that I wasn't crazy. The furniture had shifted inside her, and I'd been bumping my shins on it for weeks. "How was your day?" I asked, and the line felt like a museum piece we were both trained not to touch, a phrase protected by glass and habit, and she answered with a life I didn't recognize, an architecture of small facts that kept me standing outside in the rain. I showed her the receipt the way you show a child a broken toy, quietly, hoping they'll be gentle with the truth, because you're not ready for the sound it makes when it finally stops pretending to work. Her mouth opened, then closed, a fish reevaluating oxygen, and the silence between us became a room we couldn't leave without confessing what we'd done to each other, even if only one of us had crossed the street. She said it wasn't what I thought, and I believed her for the length of a blink, because faith is a muscle that doesn't know it's torn until you try to lift the moment and it drops on your foot. "It's complicated," she added, as if complexity were a virtue, as if knots were a language that deserved applause for being clever while hands went numb. The first tear that fell didn't belong to either of us, it belonged to the house, to the life that understood before we did that something had ended, and the floorboards took it without complaint, adding it to the weather map of our living room. We sat without touching, which is its own kind of touch, like standing near a radiator you used to warm your hands against and realizing it runs hot for other people now. When she finally said his name, it arrived like mail addressed to current resident, and I realized the person she was writing to didn't live here anymore, and maybe hadn't for a long time. The cliff didn't appear under my feet. I walked to it and looked down, the city a smear of wet lights and red signals and slow buses moving like thoughts that refused to hurry, and I understood there are kinds of falling that look like standing still. She asked if we could talk, but the word we felt borrowed, a pronoun on loan from better days that we couldn't afford anymore, and I said we would tomorrow, when the rain had decided what story it wanted to tell about us. I slept on the couch not out of anger, but because the bed felt like a witness I didn't want to call, and the cushion remembered my shape too well, like betrayal had always known where I would end up. Somewhere around 4, a car passed, its headlights dragging a pale rectangle across the ceiling, and in that moving window I saw the past flicker, breakfasts, small notes, her dancing with a spoon, all the gentle, ordinary miracles that made us think we were protected. The night held its breath, and so did I, until the first bird called, thin and brave, and the room did not answer back. Her alarm rang in the bedroom, bright and cheerful, and I heard her whisper his name before she remembered where she was. And the morning froze like a photograph no one would claim. There are nights when sleep is a locked door and the key keeps slipping, and all you can do is stand in the hallway listening to your own breathing like an intruder, rehearsing an apology that won't fit the lock either. I made coffee in the dark because light felt like a witness, and the first sip burned just enough to remind me I was still here, present in a kitchen that smelled like old stories and fresh endings. The city announced itself through the window, buses, a siren far off, rain ticking against the railings like 1,000 small fingers asking to be let in, and the world kept going the way it always does when your life stops, which feels offensive until you realize it's merciful. Her toothbrush stood beside mine, cooperative, complicit, 2 bristles softened by months of mornings, and for the first time I considered that objects are more loyal than people, and also more honest because they never promised anything. I found traces because I went looking, but I also found them because secrets leave crumbs for the version of you that refuses to look away, ride receipts. A photo half-cropped in an album, a perfume sample tucked in a drawer that didn't belong to either of us. His messages when I finally saw them were not poetry, just the easy intimacy of routine, a map of small talk leading to a country I didn't have a visa for anymore, jokes about traffic, meetings, lunch, the scaffolding of a life being built one bolt at a time. It hurt that it was ordinary. It hurt that it wasn't special, because I had told myself if she left, it would be for flames, not for someone who reminded her to drink water and sent her photos of his dog under a blanket. Grief is a patient animal. It lies down beside you and doesn't demand eye contact, and after a while you start petting it because not touching feels cruel, and you both understand the rules without saying them out loud. I didn't shout. Shouting felt like an accusation against an echo, and the room had enough history without me asking it to hold that too. So I washed the mugs and opened the curtains and let the gray in because it matched, and matching felt like control. In the mirror I looked like someone who had learned the choreography of disappointment, small movements, eyes that didn't stay, hands that hovered over the counter, and then remembered gravity. My mother used to say storms pass, but she never told me that when they do, everything is rearranged. You look at the same street and somehow all the houses are in different places, and your keys don't fit doors that used to love you. I try to run in the rain because movies teach you that bodies can process what minds can't, and by the 3rd block my lungs felt honest, raw, demanding, present, while the water rinsed the city and made the day look new. Even if it. The other man became a shape I filled with every insecurity I owned, taller, funnier, a better listener. Someone who knew how to keep light in a room without making it feel interrogated, and then I saw his photo and he looked as tired as I did, just a person trying not to hurt while wanting something that wasn't his. It didn't absolve anything, it made it human, and human hurt worse because it removed the monster I could have fought and left me with a mirror I had to face without swinging. I started noticing the other men everywhere, on the train, in offices, at crosswalks, men holding hands that weren't theirs, men saying goodbye with a promise that meant tomorrow, men who believed they were exceptions until the math corrected them. I wrote his name on a piece of paper and folded it into a small square and put it under a magnet on the fridge, not as a trophy, but as an anchor. If the storm took me, I wanted to know what to call the wind. The turning came quiet. Not like a decision, but like drift. One morning I realized I had made her coffee out of habit and then poured it down the sink without tasting it, and the waste felt like a surrender that wasn't defeat. I gathered her things not to punish, but to pare back the life that cut me each time I walked through it. Her sweater that held her shape, a book with the corner turned like a breath held, the scarf that still smelled like winter afternoons on a crowded street. I made a pile on the bed and then moved it to the chair because the bed felt like we were pretending, and then I moved it to the floor because the chair looked too much like waiting, and finally I put it by the door where departures are supposed to start. I sent a message, "Your things are here," and the period looked like a coin dropped in a well that didn't echo, and for the first time in weeks I felt the day make room for me. When she asked for alimony, it came in lawyer language, clean, precise, address on the wrong body, and I stared at the email until the words blurred and became rain on glass. The law doesn't measure love, it weighs time and money and need, and in the scale I could feel the years tipping into a calculation that didn't know what trust costs to replace. My hands shook, not from anger but from the strangeness of being invoiced for a life that had already billed me in sleepless nights and emptied rooms, and I closed the laptop like you close a coffin, because even metaphors have limits. The plan didn't arrive fully formed. It came like the morning, gradual, reluctant, then undeniable, and it wasn't about cruelty, it was about stopping the bleeding with something other than pride. I printed the email, folded it into my pocket, and walked into the rain to meet a man who specialized in endings that didn't look like revenge, until you understood what kindness can become when it finally picks a side. She came back on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that doesn't apologize for being ordinary, traffic steady, sky undecided, the elevators breath warmer than the hallways, carrying the smell of wet coats and old conversations. I had opened the windows that morning to let the stale out, and the room felt lighter in that way rooms do when they stop holding their breath for ghosts, and I stood with a cloth in my hand longer than necessary because it gave my fingers something to cling to. The knock wasn't tentative, it was precise, 3 taps in a rhythm we both recognized from years of coming home late and asking forgiveness with our knuckles before our mouths found the right words. I didn't rush. I let the distance between us finish its thought, and then I opened the door and there she was, smaller somehow, like regret had been trimming her edges while she slept. "Can we talk?" she asked, and the question put chairs in the room, made space at the table, laid out napkins we'd stopped using, all without touching anything, and I stepped aside because dignity wears quiet like a good coat. She sat on the edge of the sofa, palms flat as if pressing down a restless tide, and for a second I remembered our first apartment and the second-hand couch we believed was a promise instead of fabric. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words fell like coins that couldn't buy back what they priced, and I watched them roll under furniture, the way apologies do when they arrive late and refuse to be retrieved. Her eyes were red not from crying now but from crying earlier, in some other room where she had practiced this scene without a partner, and it made me ache for the rehearsal even as the performance left me cold. "I thought I needed something else," she said, and the ellipsis hung between us like laundry no one wanted to claim, and I nodded because names are dangerous when they try to become explanations. She told me about the other man without making him a villain. She told the truth and then kept telling it until it became a shape that couldn't fit inside the house anymore, and we both watched it leave without following. She said she missed the way mornings used to sound, my spoon, her hum, the kettle threatening to forgive us if we let it, and the memory reached for me and I stepped aside because some bridges look sturdy until you remember what burned them. "I asked for alimony because I was scared," she said, "and fear is a reasonable god until you see the offerings it demands," and I could feel the math again, the scales, the numbers that don't love anyone. "My plan," I said, and it surprised us both that I had one, speaking it into the room like a contract that needed witnesses, the way you say a vow even when it isn't a wedding anymore. It wasn't dramatic, it was a ledger written in soft pencil. No cruelty, no public spectacle, no humiliation, no dragging the good years through glass just to hear the sound. I would contest the alimony not by attacking who she had been to me, but by offering a cleaner arithmetic, a fair split, a clear line, a mercy where punishment used to pretend to be justice. And then the part that made her blink. I would donate a portion of what I could have fought for to a shelter for women leaving the very kind of house we refused to become. A quiet revenge against the idea that pain must reproduce itself to prove it existed. She cried then, not because she wanted back what she'd lost, but because kindness can be violent when it arrives where you expect a knife, and I looked away to give her privacy inside her own face. "Why?" she asked, and the word felt like rain deciding to be gentle after hours of being right, and I said because I loved her once, and I refused to turn that love into something unrecognizable just to win a game that doesn't send trophies, only receipts. The room listened, and even the traffic outside seemed to lower its voice, and for a second I hated the tenderness I still felt because it made everything harder to throw away, and then I forgave myself for that too. She reached for my hand and I didn't give it, not to punish, but to keep the last honest thing between us intact, the space that tells the truth when touch would lie. We talked for an hour about logistics, about moving days and keys and passwords, about the dog-eared map of a life you roll up and put in a corner, because you might need to find your way back to the person you were before you loved someone this hard. She said she'd withdraw the alimony petition if I would put the terms in writing, and I said I already had, and I slid the paper across the table like a bar tab we could actually pay without selling our memories for change. Her signature looked like a wave deciding not to crash, and mine looked like a shoreline accepting that even calm days change the shape of the land, and we stacked the pages neatly because tidy endings hurt less, even when they still hurt. The lawyer would call this equitable. I called it the least dishonest exit from a house that had tried to keep our promises warm and ran out of fuel. As she stood to leave, she looked around at the room like you look at an old classroom before summer, desks, chalk dust, a clock that never learned patience, and she smiled a small, broken smile that belonged to both of us and neither of us. "You were good to me," she said, and I felt the sentence settle on my shoulders like a coat that finally fit after a winter of pretending, and I nodded because arguing with gratitude feels like cursing at the weather. She stepped closer, and the shape of her in the doorframe looked like an old photograph I would carry too long in a wallet that didn't deserve the weight, and then she was gone, and the hallway swallowed her footsteps like rain swallowing chalk. The door clicked, a small, soft verdict, and the apartment exhaled in a way that told me it had been waiting to be alone with me for a while. I picked up the envelope with our signatures and noticed a small smear where her hand had trembled. And for the first time, I wondered whether letting go could be the cruelest mercy I had left to give both of us. Morning arrived with that pale, forgiving light that doesn't accuse, just reveals the kind of light that finds dust motes and turns them into constellations for anyone patient enough to look up from their own story and learn a new sky. The kettle's whistle felt less like a siren and more like a reminder that simple things still obey the old rules. Water heats, steam rises, coffee smells like a beginning even when you drink it to mark an ending. I opened the window and the city sent me the cool breath of traffic and rain-bathed pavement and bakery sugar, and I let it settle in my throat because it tasted like a future that hadn't learned my name yet but would, eventually, call me in for breakfast. The apartment wasn't empty, it was precise, paired to what stayed, and I realized that loneliness and space are cousins who don't have to visit at the same time. I gathered the last of her things into a box that used to hold winter boots, and the sound of cardboard tape tearing across itself made a clean, declarative music I didn't know I needed. The scarf went in last, folded carefully not to honor what was lost, but to respect what had once kept us both warm, even if only for a season, and I let my fingers rest on it for a beat that stretched just enough to feel honest before I closed the lid. There's a ceremony to endings that no one teaches you, you invent it. The slow walk to the door, the way you check the lock twice, the way you stand still afterward and listen for a sound that doesn't come, and when it doesn't, you call that silence by its new name, peace. I left the box by the elevator with a note that said for pickup, and the pen's ink looked steadier than I felt, but sometimes the hand teaches the heart by writing what it can't yet say aloud. Forgiveness came like good weather, suspicious at first, then ordinary, and eventually invisible because it stopped being a visitor and started being the climate you live in without remarking on it every hour. I didn't forgive her for her sake or to be noble or to win some private contest with the past. I forgave because carrying what was already too heavy made me cruel to small, undeserving things, baristas, bus drivers, my own reflection. I forgave because rage was turning my mouth into a locked drawer, and I wanted to talk to strangers again without sounding like a room with bad acoustics. I forgave because the morning light deserved its job back, painting the table and the cup and the floor in stripes that made everything look intentional. When her message came, "Thank you," I stared at it the way you stare at a distant window with a light you can't place, and I let it be a weather report instead of a map. Interesting but not directing my feet. I typed nothing back and felt the rare pleasure of choosing quiet over performance, and in that restraint found a small, private heroism that didn't need applause. Later I walked to the park after the rain, where benches hold the weight of stories without ever complaining, and I sat on one that faced the pond and watched the water forget the stones thrown at it by boys who had already run home for dinner. The sky opened a patch of blue like an apology you don't distrust. And I thought about the man I had been, and the man I was building, and the man I might one day meet like a stranger who somehow knows my coffee order. People passed, an old couple carrying a silence that sounded like comfort. A woman jogging with two braids that slapped time into the air. A boy dragging a stick to write a word that washed away before it could be read, and I recognized myself in all of them briefly. As if life had loaned me 1,000 faces just to practice being gentle. I called my father and we talked about nothing, the game, the weather, the broken latch on the back gate, and when he said, "You're good," with a question mark he tried to hide, I answered, "I'm better," and it was the truest sentence I'd said all week. Back home, I cleaned the kitchen and put on a record whose scratches had learned to be rhythm, and I cooked enough for leftovers because tomorrow would come hungry whether or not I set a place for it. In the mirror that night, I saw the space where pain had lived and noticed it looked like a room ready for new furniture, and I promised to be careful what I dragged across those floors. Release isn't dramatic. It's just choosing not to carry the same thing up the same stairs again, and when you realize that, even the climb becomes different, not easier, but honest. I slept in the bed for the first time in weeks, and it didn't feel like a crime scene. It felt like a room waking up from a bad dream, relieved to remember its original purpose. In the morning, the light was not merciful or forgiving or symbolic. It was just light doing what it always does, and I let it land on me without asking it to mean anything, and for once, that was enough. When the kettle sang, I didn't rush to silence it. I let the sound fill the apartment, a small, loud joy that didn't need a witness to be real. Closing moment, I stood by the window watching the rain begin again, soft and unafraid, and I realized the difference between revenge and release is whether you want them to see you heal, and I didn't, not anymore. The healing was mine, private as breath, ordinary as morning.